September 12th, 1683, Vienna, Austria. The city has been under siege for 2 months. 300,000 Ottoman soldiers surround the capital of the Holy Roman Empire. Starvation grips the population. Ammunition runs low. Emperor Leopold has fled. The city teeters on the edge of collapse. Then, at dawn, the largest cavalry charge in history, 20,000 Polish horsemen, led by King John III Sobieski, smashes into the Turkish lines. By sunset, the Ottoman army is in full retreat, abandoning everything: 25,000 tents, 10,000 oxen, 5,000 camels, mountains of gold, and hundreds of mysterious sacks filled with strange, dark beans. The Viennese think they're camel feed. They're about to throw them away. But one man knows differently. A Polish spy named Franz Kolschitzky, who lived among the Turks, recognizes what these beans really are: the most valuable treasure left behind by the fleeing army. Within months, Kolschitzky will open Vienna's first coffee house, the Blue Bottle, and accidentally invent what will become global coffee culture. The concept of the café as a third place, neither home nor work, but a democratic space where anyone can sit for hours, read newspapers, debate ideas, write novels, and change the world, all begins here. Before we continue with this episode, kindly subscribe to our channel and hit the like button if you love deep histories. Also, let us know where you're watching or listening from, what time it is in your country right now, and your take on this episode in the comments section. We pay good attention to our comments, and we will love to respond to your comments. Thank you. From Vienna, this idea will spread to Paris, London, New York, Seattle. Every Starbucks, every local cafe, every coffee house where people gather to work, think, and create traces its cultural DNA back to this moment, when Vienna transformed mysterious Turkish beans into the social institution that would define modern urban life. This is the story of how warfare created coffee culture, how one city turned a beverage into a way of life, and how Viennese coffeehouses became so culturally significant that UNESCO declared them Intangible Cultural Heritage, the only cafe culture in the world with that distinction. Subscribe now, because what you're about to discover is the untold origin story of every coffee shop you've ever loved. To understand how coffee came to Vienna, we must first understand the existential crisis that brought it there. In 1683, Europe faced its greatest threat since the Mongol invasions. Sultan Muhammad IV of the Ottoman Empire mobilized an army of 300,000 men under Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa with one mission: destroy Christendom and conquer Europe. Vienna was the gateway. If it fell, nothing stood between the Ottomans and the heart of Christian Europe. The Ottoman army reached Vienna on July 7, 1683. Within days, they had completely encircled the city, cutting it off from the world. Emperor Leopold I fled with his court to Passau, leaving Count Rudiger von Starhemberg in command of Vienna's defense forces, approximately 15,000 soldiers and armed civilians facing an army 20 times their size. The Ottomans began systematic bombardment. They dug trenches and tunnels, mining beneath Vienna's walls to detonate explosives. Day after day, the walls crumbled under cannon fire. Inside the city, food ran low, disease spread, hope faded. Vienna's only chance was rescue. But who would come? And could a message even reach the outside world through the Ottoman lines? This is where our coffee hero enters the story. Franz Georg Kolschitzky in German, or Jerzy Franciszek Kolschitzky in Polish, born 1640 in Kolschice, near Sambor, in what was then the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, was no ordinary citizen. He had served as an interpreter in the Turkish army for 2 years. He knew their language, their customs, their military tactics. Some sources say he'd been a prisoner, others that he'd been a diplomat. What's certain is that he understood Turkish culture intimately. When Count von Starhemberg called for a volunteer to carry a message through enemy lines to hurry the rescue, Kolschitzky stepped forward. On August 13, 1683, Kolschitzky donned a Turkish uniform. In perfect Ottoman Turkish, he walked directly through the enemy camp, pretending to be a Turkish officer inspecting positions. He crossed the Danube, reached the Austrian imperial forces, and delivered the desperate message: Vienna cannot hold much longer. King John Sobieski of Poland must come immediately. Then, incredibly, Kolschitzky walked back through the Ottoman lines and returned to Vienna, confirming that help was on the way. This wasn't just courage, this was linguistic and cultural mastery that would soon be repurposed toward coffee. King John Sobieski arrived with 23,000 Polish troops, joining the 33,000-man Austrian imperial army under Prince Charles of Lorraine. At dawn on September 12th, the combined Christian forces attacked. The battle raged all day, but the decisive moment came late afternoon when Sobieski led the largest cavalry charge in history. 20,000 Polish hussars thundering down the Kahlenberg mountain directly into the Turkish center. The Ottoman lines shattered. By nightfall, Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa was in full retreat, his army routed. The Ottoman Empire would never again threaten Central Europe. The spoils. Strange beans. In their panicked flight, the Ottomans abandoned everything: 25,000 tents, 10,000 oxen, 5,000 camels, 100,000 bushels of grain, enormous quantities of gold and treasure, and approximately 500 sacks filled with dark aromatic beans. The Viennese had never seen coffee before. They thought these sacks contained animal feed, provisions for the Ottoman camels. They were about to discard them. But Kolschitzky knew exactly what these beans were, and he knew they were worth far more than gold. Kolschitzky's heroic actions during the siege had made him a legend in Vienna. When the booty was distributed, Kolschitzky made an unusual request. "If nobody wants those sacks of strange beans, I will take them." Everyone was delighted to be rid of what they considered worthless. According to legend, Kolschitzky was also granted a house by the grateful city authorities and given permission to establish Vienna's first coffee house as a reward for his service. But there's historical debate here. While Kolschitzky certainly became one of Vienna's first coffee entrepreneurs, more recent scholarship suggests the very first Viennese coffeehouse may have actually been opened slightly earlier by Johannes Diodato, also known as Johannes Theodot or Deodato, an Armenian merchant who served at the imperial court. Diodato knew about coffee from his homeland. Armenia and the broader Middle East had been consuming coffee for over a century. He opened his establishment in 1685, and a park in Vienna's 4th district, Wieden, still bears his name, Johannes Diodata Park. But Kolschitzky's role was different and ultimately more influential. He didn't just serve Turkish coffee, he revolutionized it for European tastes. Traditional Ottoman coffee was, and remains, quite specific in preparation. Finely ground coffee boiled multiple times in a special pot, cheswe or ibrik.
served unfiltered with the grounds in the cup, often flavored with cardamom, intensely strong and bitter, drunk in small quantities. Viennese customers found this too intense, too foreign, too Turkish. Remember, Vienna had just survived a traumatic siege by these same Turks. Drinking their coffee the exact way they did felt uncomfortable, even distasteful to many. Kolschitzky's innovation. Kolschitzky made a brilliant modification. He filtered out the grounds, then added milk and sugar. This might seem trivial today, but it was revolutionary then. He transformed coffee from an exotic, intimidating Turkish beverage into something accessible, sweet, and Viennese. He opened his coffee house, reportedly called Zur blauen Flasche, the blue bottle, around 1683 to 1685. A street in Vienna's 4th district, Wien, still bears his name, Kolschitzky Gasse, in his honor, and a statue of him stands at the corner of Favoritenstrasse and Kolschitzky Gasse. The blue bottle became extraordinarily popular. Vienna had found its beverage. What made Kolschitzky's establishment and the other early Viennese coffee houses different from Turkish Kahvehane wasn't just the drink, it was the entire social concept. Viennese coffee houses from the very beginning featured democratic access. Unlike aristocratic salons or private clubs, anyone who could afford a cup of coffee could enter and stay as long as they wanted. The newspaper tradition. In 1720, Kramer's Coffee House became the first to provide newspapers for customers. This transformed coffee houses into information centers, places where you could learn about the world for the price of a coffee. Extended living rooms. Vienna's population mostly lived in tiny, crowded apartments. The spacious, elegant coffee house became what Austrians called their Wohnzimmer, their living room, a place to escape, think, socialize, work. No rush. Unlike taverns focused on alcohol consumption and turnover, coffee houses welcomed people who would sit for hours with a single cup, reading, writing, or simply observing. This model was unlike anything that existed before, and it would define coffee culture globally. After Kolschitzky and Diodato's pioneering establishments, coffee houses multiplied rapidly across Vienna. By 1700, there were numerous coffee houses throughout the city. 15 years after the first opening, 4 Greek-owned coffee houses had official licenses to serve coffee. The early period was charmingly amateur. Drinks had no standardized names. Customers would select their preferred coffee mixture from a color-shaded chart showing different levels of milk, cream, and coffee strength. Gradually, specific preparations acquired names, many of which survive today in Viennese coffee culture. Coffee house culture received its greatest boost from an unexpected source: international diplomacy. After Napoleon's defeat, European powers gathered in Vienna for the Congress of Vienna, 1814 to 1815, to reorganize Europe. Diplomats, aristocrats, intellectuals, and spies from across the continent descended on the city for months of negotiations. These visitors discovered Viennese coffee houses and were enchanted. They brought the concept back to their home cities. Soon, Vienna-style coffee houses appeared in Prague, Budapest, Trieste, Krakow, Zagreb, Sarajevo, Lviv, throughout the Austro-Hungarian Empire and beyond. The Viennese coffee house became synonymous with sophistication and intellectual life. The Biedermeier era, named after a fictional character symbolizing comfortable middle-class domesticity, was the golden age of Viennese coffeehouse culture.
Large, elegant establishments with spacious rooms with high ceilings, red velvet seating, magnificent crystal chandeliers, marble-topped tables, ornate mirrors expanding the sense of space, dark wood paneling creating intimate atmosphere. These weren't just places to drink coffee, they were palaces accessible to anyone with a few coins. By the mid-1800s, Viennese coffeehouses had become the epicenter of artistic and intellectual life. Writers who made coffeehouses their second home were Peter Altenburg, who literally listed Café Central as his address, Arthur Schnitzler, Hugo von Hofmannsthal, Karl Kraus, and Stefan Zweig. Composers and musicians. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart frequented early coffeehouses. Ludwig van Beethoven, Franz Schubert, Johann Strauss Jr. and his father. Artists and architects. Gustav Klimt, Egon Schiele, Otto Wagner. Psychoanalysts. Sigmund Freud, Café Landmann was his favorite. Alfred Adler. Political revolutionaries. Leon Trotsky. Before the Russian Revolution, he spent hours at Café Central. Josip Broz Tito. Various socialist and anarchist thinkers. The coffeehouse became the laboratory of modernity, where artistic movements were born, where political revolutions were planned, where the 20th century was imagined into existence. A specific literary movement emerged, Café House literature. Writers didn't just visit coffeehouses, they wrote in them, about them, and for them. The coffeehouse itself became a character, a muse, a narrative space. Café Greenstidel, in particular, became legendary as the meeting place of Jung Wien, Young Vienna, a literary movement of the 1990s that revolutionized German-language literature. These writers would accumulate tables for entire days, ordering single cups of coffee, filling notebooks, engaging in passionate debates. The coffee owners tolerated this because the writers' presence attracted other customers who wanted to be near the creative ferment.
Austrian writer Stefan Zweig captured the essence beautifully. The Viennese Coffeehouse is an institution of a special kind, actually a sort of democratic club, open to everyone for the price of a cheap cup of coffee, where every guest can sit for hours with this little offering to talk, write, play cards, receive post, and above all consume an unlimited number of newspapers and journals. Zweig credited Viennese coffeehouses with creating the city's cosmopolitan atmosphere. Because coffeehouses offered newspapers from across Europe, Paris, London, Berlin, Rome, Viennese café-goers were among the best-informed people in the world about international affairs. This wasn't just leisure, it was infrastructure for intellectual life. By the late 1800s, coffeehouse architecture had become an art form. Architects like Otto Wagner and Adolf Loos designed coffeehouses as Gesamtkunstwerk, total works of art where every detail, furniture, lighting, wall coverings, even the cutlery, harmonized into a unified aesthetic experience. Café Sperl, Café Havelka, Café Central, these became architectural landmarks as significant as Vienna's palaces and museums. A complex culture of rituals developed. The greeting, the Ober, waiter, greets regulars by name and knows their usual order. The seating, regulars have their table. Tourists don't understand this, but Vienna locals know certain seats are reserved by tradition for specific customers. The newspaper holder. Wooden frames hold newspapers, keeping them accessible but preventing them from being taken away. The glass of water. Coffee is always served with a small glass of water, a tradition borrowed from the Turks. The silver tray.
Coffee arrives on a small silver tray with a small spoon and sometimes a small biscuit or chocolate. The lingering. You can stay as long as you want. 1 cup of coffee buys you hours of sanctuary. No tipping harassment. Waiters are professional, not servile. Service is dignified. One of the most bewildering and delightful aspects of Viennese coffeehouse culture is the elaborate taxonomy of coffee drinks, each with its own name, preparation, and social significance. Schwarz, black coffee, the simplest, strong black coffee served with that mandatory glass of water. Brauner, brown coffee, black coffee with a small amount of milk or cream. Kleiner Brauner is a small cup. Große Brauner is large. Mélange, mixture, the most popular Viennese coffee, comparable to a cappuccino. Half coffee, half hot milk, topped with milk foam. This is what most Viennese order daily. Einspänner, strong black coffee served in a glass mug topped with a thick layer of unsweetened whipped cream. The name means one-horse carriage, reputedly because Viennese coachmen would drink it this way. The cream stays cold while the coffee underneath is hot, creating a temperature contrast as you drink through the cream layer. Franziskaner, Franciscan, similar to a melange but topped with whipped cream instead of milk foam, making it richer. Maria Theresia, named after Empress Maria Theresa, strong coffee with orange liqueur and whipped cream. Kaiser Melange, Emperor's mixture, one of the most unusual, a raw egg yolk mixed with honey, blended with espresso, sometimes fortified with cognac or rum. This traditional drink is not for everyone, but it represents the experimental spirit of Viennese coffee culture. Turkish coffee, properly prepared in the traditional Ottoman style, very finely ground, boiled in a zeve, served unfiltered with the grounds, a reminder of the origin story. Mazagran, cold coffee served in a glass, often with ice and a shot of rum, Vienna's answer to iced coffee, reputedly after Austrian soldiers in Algeria mixed coffee with cold water during the 1840s. Fiaker, named after Vienna's horse-drawn carriages, strong coffee with rum or brandy and whipped cream, the drink of the coachman. Cappuccina, named for the brown robes of Capuchin monks, black coffee with just a small amount of cream, creating a brown color similar to the monks' habits. Verkehrt, the opposite of normal coffee, more milk than coffee, essentially a latte before lattes existed. Schale Gold, Schale Brown, large cups of coffee with varying amounts of milk described by their golden or brown hue.
Verlängerter Espresso, extended espresso with extra hot water, essentially what Americans would call an Americano, though Viennese would bristle at that terminology. Eiscafé, not just cold coffee, this is vanilla ice cream with cold espresso poured over it, topped with whipped cream. It's a dessert. First-time visitors to traditional Viennese coffeehouses are often overwhelmed by the menu. The varieties seem endless. The terminology is bewildering. But here's the secret. The Ober, waiter, is your guide. If you seem uncertain, they'll ask a few questions about your preferences, strong or mild, sweet or bitter, with milk, and recommend something appropriate. This isn't just customer service, it's part of the ritual, the waiter as coffee sommelier, matching drink to customer. In the early period of Viennese coffeehouses, late 1600s, early 1700s, before these elaborate names existed, customers would select their preferred mixture from a color-shaded chart showing gradations from pure black coffee through various brown shades representing different milk ratios to almost pure white, mostly milk. This visual system eventually evolved into the named categories we know today. Coffee was never alone in Viennese coffeehouses. The drinks existed within an entire culinary and sensory universe. Sachertorte, perhaps the most famous Viennese dessert, created in 1832 by Franz, a 16-year-old apprentice chef for Prince Metternich. This dense chocolate cake with apricot jam and dark chocolate icing became the quintessential coffeehouse accompaniment. The original Sachertorte recipe is still a jealously guarded secret of Hotel Sacher. Apfelstrudel, apple strudel. Interestingly, strudel's origins trace to the Ottoman Turkish pastry baklava, another culinary gift from the 1683 siege. Thin, crisp pastry wrapped around spiced apple filling, served warm with vanilla sauce or whipped cream. Linzer Torte, one of the oldest known cake recipes, dating to 1653 from Linz, Austria. Almond pastry with red currant jam topped with a lattice crust. Kaiserschmarrn, Emperor's Mess, allegedly Emperor Franz Joseph I's favorite dessert. Shredded pancake with raisins, caramelized sugar, and plum compote. Punschkapfen, bright pink cake cubes made from cake scraps bound with chocolate, rum, and apricot jam, then covered in pink icing, the ultimate coffeehouse recycling. Topfenstrudel, sweet cheese strudel made with quark or Topfen, raisins, and lemon zest. Gugelhupf, a traditional Bundt-style cake often studded with raisins and almonds, dusted with powdered sugar. While desserts get the glory, Viennese coffeehouses also serve savory dishes. Würstel, sausages. Frankfurter or Käsekeine sausages with mustard and fresh bread. Schinken-Käse-Toast, toasted ham and cheese sandwich, simple but perfect with coffee. Beef goulash, an Hungarian import that became thoroughly Viennese, often served in coffeehouses during lunch hours. During the Napoleonic era, 1808, when coffee prices skyrocketed due to the Continental blockade, coffeehouse owners began serving full meals and alcohol to survive economically. This transformed some coffeehouses into café restaurants, a hybrid model that persists today. This deserves special attention because it's central to the Viennese coffeehouse experience. Since 1720, when Kramer's Café House first provided newspapers, reading has been integral to coffeehouse culture. A traditional Viennese coffeehouse offers local newspapers, multiple Viennese dailies, national papers from across Austria, international press, major newspapers from Germany, France, Italy, England, and beyond, magazines, literary, political, and cultural periodicals, trade journals, professional publications. These aren't just displayed, they're mounted on wooden holders that keep them organized while allowing multiple people to browse different sections. The newspapers are free to read. You can sit with your melange and spend 3 hours reading international news without anyone disturbing you. Stefan Zweig wrote that this newspaper culture gave Vienna a cosmopolitan air because café-goers were reading Parisian, London, and Berlin newspapers alongside their Viennese ones, staying current with international thought. Many classic Viennese coffeehouses feature live piano music in the evenings, not background music, actual performances. Café Central, Café Spell, and Café Prükel are famous for their evening piano recitals. Classical music, Viennese waltzes, sometimes jazz, all performed live in the same space where people are drinking coffee, reading, and conversing. This creates a unique ambiance. You're simultaneously in a café, a concert hall, and a library. In warmer months, many coffeehouses extend onto sidewalks with outdoor seating called Schanigarten. The word comes from Schani, a diminutive of Johann, a common name for Viennese waiters, combined with Garten, garden. Sitting in a Schanigarten with your Einspanne, watching Viennese life pass by, reading a newspaper under a linden tree, this is quintessential Viennese summer. The lighting and atmosphere. Walk into a traditional Viennese coffeehouse and you immediately notice the light, soft, warm, slightly dim. This isn't accidental. The lighting design creates a contemplative atmosphere. Chandeliers provide ambient glow, table lamps add focused reading light. Large windows admit natural daylight, but heavy curtains can modulate it. The result is a space that feels simultaneously public and intimate. You're surrounded by people, yet you have personal space for thought.
Another architectural feature, large, ornate mirrors on walls, creating an optical illusion of expanded space and allowing subtle people watching without being obvious. These mirrors multiply the chandelier's light, add visual depth, and let you observe the room while appearing to gaze thoughtfully into distance. The First World War, 1914 to 1918, devastated Austria-Hungary. The empire that had sustained Viennese coffeehouse culture for centuries collapsed. Economic hardship followed. Coffee beans became scarce and expensive. Many coffeehouses struggled to survive. But then something interesting happened. Dance cafes emerged in the 1920s. These establishments combined traditional coffeehouse culture with American jazz music and dancing, a fusion of Viennese tradition with modern American energy. Young Viennese flocked to these new venues, keeping coffeehouse culture alive by adapting it to post-war realities. During the Great Depression, Viennese coffeehouses took on an additional function, black market trading. Under tables, in quiet corners, sought-after goods were discreetly exchanged. Coffeehouses became informal markets where scarce items could be bought and sold beyond official rationing systems. This shadow economy helped many families survive the Depression years. The Nazi period, 1938 to 1945. In March 1938, Nazi Germany annexed Austria, the Anschluss. The impact on Viennese coffeehouses was immediate and devastating. Jewish-owned coffeehouses, especially prevalent in Vienna's second district, Leopoldstadt, were seized by the Nazis through Aryanization. These establishments had been vibrant intellectual centers, second homes to Jewish writers, artists, musicians, and intellectuals. Virtually overnight, they were stolen, their owners driven into exile or murdered in the Holocaust. The cultural loss was incalculable. Many of Vienna's most brilliant minds, the people who'd made coffeehouse culture so intellectually rich, were dead or dispersed across the world. After 1945, Vienna's coffeehouses reopened, but they'd lost much of their soul. The Jewish intellectual community that had animated them was gone. The 1950s brought what historians call the Kaffeehaussterben, the death of coffeehouses. Multiple factors converged. Television, people stayed home to watch TV rather than going to coffeehouses for entertainment and news. Italian espresso bars, fast, modern espresso bars offering quick coffee in a standing position, became popular. They were the opposite of lingering Viennese tradition, quick, efficient, modern. Changing work patterns, post-war economic restructuring meant fewer people had time for hours-long cafe sessions. Suburban sprawl, Vienna expanded. New residential areas lacked the dense, walkable urban fabric that supported neighborhood coffeehouses. Between 1950 and 1980, many historic Viennese coffeehouses closed permanently. Café Grünsteilt, Café Heinrichhof, dozens of others gone. By the early 1980s, Viennese coffeehouse culture seemed headed for extinction. Then, in 1983, something remarkable happened. Vienna celebrated the 300th anniversary of the first coffeehouse, dating to the 1683 siege and its aftermath. The Viennese city government, cultural organizations, and remaining coffeehouses organized exhibitions, lectures, historical tours, and public events celebrating coffeehouse culture. Viennese citizens, especially younger generations who'd grown up with espresso bars, suddenly rediscovered their unique heritage. They realized what they'd dismissed as old-fashioned was actually irreplaceable, a distinctive cultural form that no other city had preserved. A preservation movement emerged. Historic coffeehouses that had survived were recognized as cultural treasures. Their interiors were protected, their traditions were documented. Tourism helped too. Visitors from around the world wanted to experience authentic Viennese coffeehouses, providing economic support.
The ultimate validation came November 24, 2011, when UNESCO inscribed Viennese coffeehouse culture on Austria's National Inventory of Intangible Cultural Heritage. UNESCO's citation recognized that Viennese coffeehouses are, quote, where time and space are consumed, but only the coffee is found on the bill, end quote. This was extraordinary. UNESCO doesn't typically recognize commercial establishments, but they acknowledged that Viennese coffeehouses transcend mere business. They're living cultural institutions. This designation has helped secure their future, providing both prestige and practical support for preservation. Viennese coffeehouse culture didn't stay in Vienna. It radiated outward, adapting to different cities while maintaining its essential character. As the Habsburg Empire spread across Central and Eastern Europe, Viennese-style coffeehouses followed. Prague, Café Slavia, Café Louvre, these Czech coffeehouses adopted the Viennese model wholesale, becoming centers of Czech intellectual life. Budapest, the magnificent New York Café and Café Gerbeau brought Viennese elegance to Hungary. Krakow, Jama Mikulik became the gathering place for the Young Poland artistic movement. Trieste, after being part of Austria until 1918, Trieste maintained Viennese coffeehouse culture better than almost anywhere outside Vienna itself. Café Tomaseo opened 1830, Café San Marco, Café degli Specchi. These establishments still operate with authentic Viennese atmosphere. Lviv, then Lemberg, Viennese cafés flourished in this multicultural city, though most were destroyed by World War II and Soviet occupation. The intellectual diaspora. When intellectuals fled Nazi Austria, they brought coffeehouse culture with them. Paris, while Paris already had café culture, Austrian and German refugees gravitated toward establishments that recalled their lost coffeehouses. London, the émigré community in London, established cafés trying to recreate Viennese atmosphere. New York, Greenwich Village and the Upper West Side saw Austrian-style coffeehouses opened by refugees. The famous Hungarian pastry shop near Columbia University, opened in 1961, captures some of that spirit. Israel, Café Tamar in Tel Aviv, founded by Viennese Jewish refugees, maintained the tradition in their new homeland. The modern international presence. Today, Vienna-style coffeehouses can be found worldwide. North America, Julius Meinl, Chicago, an authentic recreation. Café House de Châtillon, Greater Seattle, serving traditional Viennese coffee and pastries. Café Sabarsky in Manhattan, inside the Neue Galerie, designed to evoke early 20th century Vienna. Middle East, Austrian Hospice Café in Jerusalem, a piece of Vienna in the Old City of Jerusalem.
Asia, various cities have Vienna-inspired coffee houses, though often mixing Viennese aesthetics with local café culture. The Starbucks irony. Here's something fascinating. While Starbucks seems like the opposite of Viennese coffeehouse culture, fast, standardized, corporate, it actually borrowed key Viennese concepts. The third place concept. Starbucks founder Howard Schultz explicitly described Starbucks as a third place between home and work, the exact concept Vienna invented. Comfortable seating. Starbucks provides armchairs and couches, encouraging lingering, very Viennese. The Wi-Fi laptop culture. Modern people working on laptops in coffee shops for hours. That's exactly what Viennese writers did with pen and paper for centuries. The beverage varieties. Starbucks' elaborate menu of coffee variations is a direct descendant of Vienna's Melange, Einspanner, Cappucciner, etc. The irony is that corporate coffee chains worldwide have monetized and standardized what Vienna created as an organic, local, unreplicable culture. Let's walk through some of Vienna's legendary coffee houses, the ones that have survived, the ones that still embody the tradition. Located in Palais Ferstel on Herrengasse, Café Central is probably Vienna's most famous coffee house internationally. This was where Leon Trotsky played chess daily before returning to Russia for the revolution. Sigmund Freud held meetings with early psychoanalysts. Alfred Loos, the architect, conducted his legendary arguments about design. Alfred Polgar, Peter Altenburg, and other literary giants held court. The story goes that in 1913, when Austrian Foreign Minister Count Berchtold was warned that a revolutionary named Bronstein, Trotsky, was plotting against the Russian Tsar from Vienna, Berchtold laughed. And who is going to make this revolution? Perhaps Mr. Bronstein from Café Central? 4 years later, Trotsky helped lead the October Revolution. Today, Café Central maintains its grand architecture, soaring ceilings with arched vaults, marble columns, elegant chandeliers. A piano player performs daily, and there's a life-sized sculpture of Peter Altenburg sitting at his table, a reminder that this writer actually listed the café as his official address.
On Dorotheergasse, Café Hauwelke represents a different tradition, smaller, more intimate, bohemian rather than grand. Leopold and Josephine Hauwelke opened it in 1939, and it became the post-World War II gathering place for artists, writers, actors, and students. The Hauwelkes had no money for fancy renovations, so the cafe retained its simple, worn, authentic character. The nicotine-stained walls, the crowded tables, the ancient wooden chairs all became part of its charm. Famous for Buchteln, sweet yeast rolls served after 10 p.m., baked by Frau Hauwelke herself until her death at 101 in 2005. The Artist Collection. Impoverished artists paid for coffee with their artwork. The Hauwelkes accepted. Today, those walls display works by major 20th-century Austrian artists worth significant sums. The atmosphere. Intimate, bohemian, unpretentious, the opposite of grand imperial coffee houses. Leopold Hauwelke ran the cafe until his death at 100 in 2011. Their sons continue the tradition. Café Sperl, founded 1880. On Gumpendorfer Strasse in the 6th District, Café Sperl is perhaps the most perfectly preserved 19th-century coffeehouse. Walking in feels like time travel. The interior has remained virtually unchanged since the 1880s. Thonet bentwood chairs, billiard tables in the back room, brass coat racks, marble-topped tables, original gas lamps converted to electric. Viennese crystal chandeliers. This was the cafe of professionals, doctors, lawyers, civil servants who lived in the surrounding neighborhood. No revolutionary intellectuals, just solid middle-class Viennese pursuing their rituals. It's still family-owned, still operating exactly as it did 140 years ago. UNESCO specifically mentioned Café Sperl in their Cultural Heritage citation. On Stubenring, near the center, Café Prükel represents the 1950s aesthetic, when it was completely redesigned after World War II damage. While other coffeehouses preserve 19th century interiors, Prükel embraced mid-century modern design. The result is elegant 1950s sophistication, clean lines, geometric patterns, functional furniture. It's beloved by Viennese precisely because it's not trying to be imperial-era nostalgic. It represents a different moment in coffeehouse evolution. Café Landmann, founded 1873. Directly across from the Burg Theater and Vienna City Hall, Café Landmann is the establishment favorite. Politicians, actors, diplomats. Sigmund Freud was a regular, always occupying the same table. Today, it's owned by a larger group, and some purists say it's become too touristy, but it maintains high standards, excellent food, impeccable service, grand atmosphere. Designed by architect Adolf Loos in the Jugendstil or Art Nouveau period, Café Museum on Friedrichstrasse represents architectural minimalism, revolutionary for its time. Loos stripped away decorative elements that other coffeehouses featured, creating a spare, elegant space. Critics called it Café Nihilismus, but artists loved it. Gustav Klimt, Egon Schiele, Oskar Kokoschka, the entire Vienna secession movement made it their headquarters. The current interior isn't original. It was renovated in the 1930s and again after World War II, but it maintains Loos's minimalist aesthetic. On Ringstrasse, directly across from the Vienna State Opera, Café Schwarzenberg occupies one of Vienna's most prestigious locations. Its location made it the café of choice for opera-goers. You'd have coffee here before or after performances. The terrace seating is particularly famous. In summer, sitting outside Schwarzenberg watching Viennese life circulate around the Ringstrasse is quintessential Vienna. Demel, founded 1786. Technically more a coffeehouse pastry shop hybrid, Demel on Kohlmarkt deserves mention as the former imperial and royal court confectionery. Founded in 1786, Demel served the Habsburg court. The interior preserves imperial-era opulence, elaborate wood paneling, display cases showing pastry making, uniformed staff. This is where you go for the most traditional, highest-quality Viennese pastries alongside your coffee. The smaller gems. Beyond these famous names, Vienna has dozens of smaller, equally authentic neighborhood coffeehouses. Café Hummel in the 9th District, unchanged since 1935. Café Weimar in Währing, small, intimate, locals-only atmosphere. Café Ritter in Mariahilf, student favorite near the Theater an der Wien. Café Rüdigerhof in Landstrasse, working-class coffeehouse, unpretentious, authentic. These neighborhood establishments preserve the tradition without tourist crowds, there where actual Viennese go daily. To truly experience Viennese coffeehouse culture, you need to understand its unwritten rules and subtle rituals. The cardinal rule of Viennese coffeehouses: time doesn't exist here. 1 cup of coffee buys you indefinite stay. You can sit for 5 hours with a single melange, reading, writing, thinking, observing, and no one will pressure you to order more or leave. This is so fundamental that it's become an identity marker. A Viennese will tell you, in Italian bars you drink standing up and leave in 2 minutes. In American cafes, they want turnover. Only in Vienna can you truly stay. When entering, a regular customer will be greeted by the Ober, or waiter, with a nod of recognition, possibly their name, Herr Doktor or Frau Professor, an unspoken acknowledgement of their usual table. Tourists get polite service, regulars get relationship. If you become a regular, and it takes months, the Ober will eventually remember your preferred drink and table. This is the highest honor a Viennese coffeehouse can bestow. The newspapers are communal property, but there's protocol. Take only the newspaper or section you're actively reading. Don't monopolize the international press. Return newspapers to their proper holder when finished. Don't remove newspapers from the café. Never fold, tear, or damage newspapers. If someone's clearly waiting for the section you have, finish it promptly. Violating these rules marks you as ignorant of Viennese coffeehouse culture.
Rule 4. The Ober is not a servant. Viennese waiters, Ober, plural Kellner, are professionals with dignity. They're not there to constantly check if you need anything. They won't hover. They won't rush you. When you need service, make eye contact, a subtle hand gesture. If necessary, a quiet Herr Ober bitte, waiter please. Never snap fingers, whistle, or wave frantically. That's deeply disrespectful. And when settling the bill, tipping in Vienna is modest. Round up to a convenient number or add 5 to 10%. The Ober's dignity doesn't depend on tips. Rule 5. The table is your territory. Once you've been seated, that table is yours until you leave. No one will ask you to share the table with strangers, except in extremely crowded conditions. No one will pressure you to leave to free the table. This creates the psychological space needed for thinking, writing, working. Rule 6. Silence is golden. Viennese coffeehouses are not silent. People do converse, but there's an expectation of moderate volume. Loud phone conversations are frowned upon. Many coffeehouses have "no mobile phones" signs. Raucous groups disrupting the atmosphere will receive disapproving looks from both staff and other customers. The soundscape should be quiet conversation, rustling newspapers, coffee cups on saucers, gentle piano music, the ambient hum of civilized society. Rule 7. The order matters. When ordering, precision matters. Don't say, "I'll have coffee with milk." Do say, "Einen Melange bitte," or "Einen Einspenner bitte." The specific drink names aren't just terminology, they represent precise preparations. Using them correctly shows you understand the culture. Rule 8. Dress appropriately. While dress codes have relaxed, traditional Viennese coffeehouses still expect a certain standard. Acceptable, business casual, smart casual, Vienna elegant, well-groomed, coordinated, refined. Discouraged, athletic wear, beach clothes, extreme casualness, anything that suggests you're treating the coffeehouse like a fast food outlet. This isn't snobbery, it's about maintaining the atmosphere of refinement. Rule 9. Writing and working is sacred. If someone is clearly writing, reading, or working, don't interrupt. Viennese coffeehouses have a long tradition of being writing spaces. If you see someone with a notebook or laptop deeply focused, leave them alone. This is respected creative time. Peter Altenburg famously wrote, "I am not in the coffeehouse, I am at work." Rule 10. Respect the regulars. If you notice someone always sits at a particular table, don't occupy that table, especially during their usual hours. Regulars have their tables by tradition, not by reservation. This unspoken system allows people to find their preferred spot, creating consistency and comfort. As a tourist or newcomer, you won't know these invisible territorial boundaries. But observe, are certain elderly gentlemen always at the same corner table? That's probably their spot.
Beyond the coffee, beyond the pastries, beyond the newspapers and architecture, what does Viennese coffeehouse culture actually mean? Why does it matter? Sociologist Ray Oldenburg coined the term third place in his 1989 book, The Great Good Place, spaces distinct from home, first place, and work, second place, where community happens. Vienna invented this concept 300 years before Oldenburg named it. The Viennese coffeehouse provided neutral ground, not your home with its private rules, not your workplace with its hierarchies. Leveling, social status mattered less. A waiter and a professor could sit at adjacent tables as equals. Conversation, the primary activity, was talk, ideas, debates, storytelling. Accessibility, open to anyone who could afford a coffee. Regulars, a core group of habitués, gave the place character. Low profile, unassuming, comfortable, welcoming rather than pretentious. Playful mood. Conversation was often witty, clever, intellectually playful. This created what urban planners now call social infrastructure, the physical places where community bonds form. Austrian writer Alfred Polgar wrote, "The coffeehouse is a democratic institution. For the price of a cup of coffee, one can share in the company of great minds." This was radical in the 19th century. European society was rigidly hierarchical. Aristocrats had their exclusive salons, workers had their taverns, middle classes had their clubs. Only in the coffeehouse could all these groups potentially occupy the same space. A poor poet could sit beside a wealthy banker. A student could overhear a famous professor's conversation. Social mixing that was impossible elsewhere happened daily in coffeehouses. Remember that most Viennese lived in tiny, crowded apartments, often single rooms housing entire families. The spacious, elegant coffeehouse became what they called their Wohnzimmer, living room. This wasn't metaphor. People genuinely treated coffeehouses as extensions of their homes. Received mail there, some coffeehouses held letters for regular customers, conducted business meetings there, celebrated birthdays there, mourned deaths there, fell in love there, wrote their great works there. Life happened in coffeehouses.
The loneliness cure. Cities can be profoundly lonely. You're surrounded by millions but deeply isolated. Viennese coffeehouses offered a solution. You could be alone without being lonely. Sitting in a coffeehouse, reading your newspaper, you're technically solitary, but you're surrounded by human presence, the quiet hum of others' lives. You're part of a community without the obligations community usually demands. This is why elderly Viennese often spend entire afternoons in coffeehouses. It's not just about the coffee, it's about being among people without having to actively engage. Stefan Zweig captured this. One can be alone in a Viennese coffeehouse without being lonely, and part of society without being disturbed. The cultural incubator. Some of humanity's most important ideas were born in Viennese coffeehouses. Psychoanalysis. Freud's early theories were debated in Café Landmann. Logical positivism. The Vienna Circle. Philosophers like Moritz Schlick, Rudolf Carnap developed groundbreaking philosophy of science at Café Central. Atonal music. Arnold Schoenberg and his disciples discussed revolutionary musical theory at coffeehouses. Expressionist art. Klimt, Schiele, Kokoschka planned the Vienna secession movement over coffee. Political revolutions. Trotsky, Tito, and other revolutionaries plotted from Viennese cafés. Why were coffeehouses so creative? Because they provided time, hours to think deeply without pressure. Stimulation, overhearing other conversations, reading diverse newspapers. Collegiality, finding intellectual peers and collaborators. Affordability, poor artists and writers could afford to be there. Tolerance, eccentric ideas were welcomed, not suppressed. You can't plan creativity, you can only create conditions where it might emerge. Viennese coffeehouses were those conditions. The resistance to modernity. In a world of smartphones, instant gratification, productivity obsession, and digital distraction, Viennese coffeehouses represent stubborn resistance. They insist slowness over speed, contemplation over consumption, quality over efficiency, being over doing, presence over productivity. When you sit in Café Sperl with your Einspanner, reading a physical newspaper, ignoring your phone, you're participating in an act of cultural resistance. You're saying, not everything must be optimized, digitized, or monetized. Some things exist simply because they're beautiful, meaningful, human. This is why UNESCO recognized Viennese coffeehouses. They're not just businesses, they're living arguments for a different way of being in the world. What's the future of Viennese coffeehouse culture in the 21st century? Rising rents. Vienna's prime locations, where historic coffeehouses sit, have become extraordinarily expensive. Real estate values have skyrocketed. For small, family-owned establishments, the economics are brutal. Changing consumer habits. Younger Viennese often prefer quick, modern cafes with Wi-Fi, smoothies, and efficient service. The slow ritual of traditional coffeehouses can seem antiquated. Tourism versus authenticity. Major coffeehouses like Café Central now serve thousands of tourists daily. This provides economic sustainability, but risks transforming them into museums rather than living institutions. When 80% of your customers are tourists, are you genuinely Viennese? The generational gap. The children and grandchildren of coffeehouse owners often pursue other careers. Succession is a constant problem. When the current generation retires or dies, will anyone continue? Digital disruption. Newspapers, fundamental to coffeehouse culture, are declining. Younger people get news from phones. As physical newspapers disappear, one pillar of coffeehouse culture erodes. But there are also reasons for optimism. UNESCO recognition. The 2011 designation as Intangible Cultural Heritage provides both prestige and some practical support. It's helped younger Viennese appreciate their unique cultural inheritance. Global coffeehouse renaissance. Ironically, while Vienna was losing coffeehouses in the 1960s and 70s, the rest of the world was adopting coffee culture. Now, international appreciation creates demand. Third wave coffee. The global specialty coffee movement emphasizes quality, craft, and experience over convenience, values perfectly aligned with Viennese tradition. Young baristas worldwide are studying Viennese methods. Remote work revolution. The COVID-19 pandemic normalized working from cafes. As remote work continues, demand for beautiful, comfortable spaces to work outside home increases. Viennese coffeehouses are perfectly designed for this. Hygge and slow living. International movements promoting coziness, slowness, and intentional living align beautifully with coffeehouse philosophy. Vienna offers the original version of what others are trying to recreate. The new generation of owners. Some younger Viennese are rediscovering coffeehouse culture, not as nostalgia, but as relevant, sustainable business. They're opening establishments that respect tradition while adapting, maintaining the slow-paced, lingering, welcomed atmosphere, offering high-quality, single-origin coffee alongside traditional Viennese preparations, preserving newspaper and reading culture, creating beautiful, comfortable spaces, but also accepting credit cards, offering Wi-Fi sometimes, being LGBTQ+ welcoming, featuring contemporary art. These neo-traditional coffeehouses prove the model can evolve without dying. The glocalization model. Vienna has also seen Vienna-style coffeehouses open in other Austrian cities and abroad, but with local twists. Salzburg, Graz, Linz all have Vienna-style coffeehouses. Prague, Budapest, Trieste maintain their Habsburg-era café traditions. Even cities without Austro-Hungarian history are opening Vienna-inspired establishments. This creates a network of cultural preservation, not just Vienna holding the torch, but a global community keeping the flame alive. Education and appreciation. Austrian schools now teach coffeehouse culture as part of national heritage. Walking tours focus on historic coffeehouses. Books, documentaries, and academic studies preserve the tradition. The more young people learn about what makes their coffeehouse culture unique, the more likely they are to value and preserve it. The anti-Starbucks movement. Interestingly, Starbucks and chain cafes have provoked a backlash, a desire for authentic, local, characterful spaces. Generic chain coffee is everywhere, but spaces with history, character, and soul are rare. This scarcity creates value. Viennese coffeehouses offer something chains cannot: genuine connection to place, history, and culture.
We began with a siege, with war and fear and a desperate city on the edge of destruction. From that chaos, from those sacks of mysterious beans abandoned by a fleeing army, Vienna created something that would outlast empires, a way of being together, a philosophy of time and space, a democratic institution disguised as a café. The journey from battlefield to coffeehouse, from Turkish military rations to Viennese cultural treasure, is one of history's most unexpected transformations. What Vienna gave the world. From Vienna's coffeehouses, the world received the concept of the third place, community spaces beyond home and work, the café as workspace. Coffee shops full of laptop workers exist because Viennese writers proved it worked centuries ago. Elaborated coffee drinks. Every latte, cappuccino, or flavored coffee drink descends from Viennese experimentation. The newspaper cafe, free reading material while you drink. Lingering culture, the idea that you can stay as long as you want. Coffee and pastry pairing. Viennese perfected this combination. The democratic salon, where all classes could potentially mingle. Every time you sit in a coffeehouse anywhere in the world, reading, working, thinking, you're participating in a tradition that began in 17th century Vienna. The deeper lesson. But perhaps the most profound gift Vienna's coffeehouses offer is philosophical. In an accelerating world obsessed with productivity, efficiency, and measurable outcomes, Viennese coffeehouses insist on the value of unproductive time. Time spent thinking without clear purpose, observing without participating, being present without accomplishing, connecting without networking. These wastes of time are actually where meaning happens, where ideas germinate, where community forms, where humanity remembers how to simply be. The Viennese coffeehouse says not everything must be optimized. Some things exist simply because they're beautiful. Some institutions survive because they serve the soul, not the economy. If you ever visit Vienna, do this. Find a traditional coffeehouse, not the most famous, but one with character. Enter in the afternoon. Order a melange or an Einspanner. Take a newspaper. Don't check your phone. Just sit, read, observe, think.
Watch the light change as afternoon becomes evening. Notice the other customers, the elderly gentleman with his browner and newspaper, the young woman writing in her notebook, the couple quietly talking over soccertort. Feel the weight of centuries. Understand that you're participating in a ritual that Mozart, Beethoven, Freud, Klimt, Trotsky, and countless others participated in. You're not just drinking coffee, you're connecting to history. You're joining a conversation that's been ongoing for 340 years. And when you finally leave, hours later, after a single coffee, you'll understand why Vienna fought so hard to preserve this culture. Because in that coffee house, for those hours, you weren't a consumer or a producer. You weren't an employee or a boss. You weren't optimizing or networking. You were simply human, present, alive, part of something larger than yourself. That's the gift of the Viennese Coffeehouse. That's why it matters. That's why it must survive. If this documentary gave you a new appreciation for coffee culture's origins, hit that subscribe button. Share this with any coffee lover who doesn't know they're participating in Viennese tradition every time they sit in a café. And maybe, just maybe, the next time you're in a coffee house, slow down, put the phone away, order something you can't pronounce, and remember Vienna. Because every coffee house is a small piece of Vienna scattered across the world, keeping the dream alive. Prost! Enjoy your coffee.